Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lit Up Lightworker Podcast, bringing you fun and soulful interviews with spiritual teachers with the aim of tuning you in and lighting you up. You can access all episodes of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos and interviews all about finding and following your life purpose. My name is George Lizos. I'm a spiritual teacher, intuitive, the author of Be the Guru and the #1 bestseller, Lightworkers Gotta Work. And today I have with me Kamran Bedi. Kamran Bedi is the author of Your Mind is Your Home, available worldwide on Amazon. He works as a mental health practitioner online with people all over the world utilizing NLP, hypnosis, and Iemt. His extensive coaching experience has led him to focus his work on anxiety and PTSD, where he usually sees people get life-changing results between 1 to 3 sessions. He continues to work with people from Love Island, Made in Chelsea, The X Factor, business owners, school teachers, and NHS nurses. He's passionate about educating people about what they can do with their mind to change and transform their lives. And he also certifies NLP and hypnosis practitioners. Kamran, welcome to the Lit Up Lightworker Podcast.
Hi, George. How are you today?
I am well. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Happy to be here.
I am so excited to finally have this conversation around Iemt, integral eye movement therapy, and all about trauma, PTSD, and shifting our identity, our negative identity about ourselves into something positive. And just to give people like a short introduction about how we met. So back in June 2020, I was going through a dark night of the soul, and then you were recommended to me by one of my friends, a common friend of ours. We did 3 sessions on Iemt, and I was so pleasantly shocked to see that in just 3 sessions, I was able to heal so much trauma and so many limiting beliefs that I had been working on for years. And in just 3 sessions, we were able to overcome them. So much so that I then went ahead and I trained myself as an Iemt practitioner and started working with people with trauma on a much deeper level. So first of all, I would like to thank you, like I know I thanked you privately as well, but publicly, for introducing me to Iemt and guiding me through overcoming my own issues.
You're very, very welcome. It was a pleasure and a really interesting journey to take you through the work that you wanted to do, but it's also really inspiring that you've gone on to train as a practitioner, soon to be advanced practitioner. Yes. And I've already seen in some of the areas where you're considering working around this. So, you know, I love people when they're creative with what they can do and taking it into a spiritual realm as well. I'm really excited to see how you help so many people with this amazing process.
Thank you. Indeed, Iemt is like so versatile in the sense that it can adjust to so many different areas. It can be combined with so many processes. And we're going to dig into this in just a little bit. But before we get into the juicy parts, let's talk a little bit about your journey. So for people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about what has been your journey to doing this work, to helping people overcome the limiting beliefs, traumas, and doing Iemt as well?
Yeah, so I've been working personally with people for 10 years, and that started around the body because I used to be a professional dancer. So I worked in the music industry and I taught Pilates when I was out of work. And then I set up a Pilates business where I was working with people with the body on a one-to-one level. And I started to notice that with some clients, they were healthier, they were fitter, they were stronger, but there was something still going on. And I started to then explore the mind. So in my training, I first explored obviously lots of self-help books, lots of self-development books, but started with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And that's a technique and method that I actually went on the training for my own personal development. And it was simply because from what I'd read, I was interested, I was fascinated with what I could suddenly do for my own mind. So I wanted to learn more. I was a bit like, how have I got to this point in my mid-20s where I don't know how to operate my own mind, how I can change things for the better? So NLP was really fascinating for me. And then I started to work with people around pain management, around motivation and clarity coaching. So very, very different in the early days of where I am now. From NLP, my interest grew and I trained in hypnosis, hypnotherapy, and worked with people around insomnia, confidence building, weight management. So I was doing lots of different things. And then I moved towards integral eye movement therapy, which was an amazing life transforming experience of just learning how you can work with someone on such a deep level very quickly to get to the root cause of their pain, of their trauma, of their negative experience, of their anxiety, and help them overcome it very quickly through, which is what a simple eye movement, but such a powerful movement. And it's within that work, which I now incorporate pretty much into every session that I do, where I started focusing on anxiety. And so using the anxiety model around Iemt and getting my experience up with using it for around a year and a half, which then naturally moved into post-traumatic stress disorder, and having worked with some people from all walks of life with some really deep PTSD, some unconscious PTSD, some things that's been more conscious, that have kind of got this full picture now of getting to a point where that's my focus around anxiety and PTSD.
Now, this is so fascinating because anxiety and PTSD is something we all experience to some degree, at least. If it's not PTSD, it's just PDS, just a post-traumatic flashback coming into when we get triggered around whatever happens in our lives. So let's unpack those terms a little bit. What is anxiety and why do we have it?
So everyone experiences anxiety, and to a degree, we sometimes need to feel anxiety to stay. Sometimes it can serve us to be motivated, or it can be productive, or it can keep us safe. But what's interesting, I'm currently writing my second book, which is all on anxiety. And anxiety is such an umbrella term, right? So people will say, I'm anxious, or I have anxiety, or I'm an anxious person. But actually, if you take away that title, what is it that you're experiencing, which is very NLP? What is your subjective experience? And a lot of the answers I get will be things like, I have fear for going out, or I lack confidence. I don't feel confident in social settings. I'm thinking the worst is going to happen when I travel. So where someone says, I'm anxious or I have anxiety, if you go down that level, that layer, and to identify what it actually is, then you're specific and you can focus in on that area. Whereas sometimes the term anxiety can, for an individual, end up limiting, because then that becomes their identity or their label or how they see the world and how they experience the world, because they are that anxious person. But are they just lacking in confidence in one area of their life and confident in another? So it's really about getting specific.
That's what I love about negative emotions in general and fears, is that they're so layered. You can always go deeper and deeper and deeper and identify like a deeper root cause behind them. So let's say someone identifies anxiety within them, and then they ask themselves, what is it that I'm actually experiencing? And then all those limiting beliefs come up. How are all those limiting beliefs that create the anxiety, how are they created?
I think it's different again for every single person. If I were to kind of just look at that question from my professional experience, I feel that limiting beliefs are created through experience. So it could be an experience the person's had. Now, it doesn't have to be a physical experience. It could even also be a mental experience. So a physical experience is where someone has an experience, they feel uncomfortable, someone says something, they then feel that they can't push themselves forward. So their limiting belief is, I can't do X, Y, Z. But you could also have a mental formulation of a limiting belief where you're watching someone or you're observing a crowd of people, and then you start to think to yourself, I'll never be good enough, that will never happen to me. So it's more of a mental thing, which will be fueled by emotion, but then you've still created the limiting belief from what's external that feeds the internal. So I guess it is individual to each person, but I pretty much think that they're formed through experience. Now, if you look at how we break through our limiting beliefs, we break through them through experience, right? We put ourselves out there, we take action, and then suddenly we shatter that belief because we feel confident, or we can do that thing, or we can be more social. So just as limiting beliefs can be formed through experience and new empowering beliefs, we have to experience something, whether it's with a coach or practitioner, or we have to do something to shatter and open that belief up.
That is so interesting. So just to think about it a little bit visually. So if we imagine that, so anxiety or a negative emotion is like a bucket. When we look into this bucket and we search deeper and deeper and deeper,
Yeah.
we find a raft of like experiences, whether they're mental or observations or physical experiences, whether they're traumatic or less traumatic or just negative experiences that have contributed to the creation of this limiting belief that is that bucket, and therefore the emotion produced by it. Is that right? Is that how we approach it?
I think that's a really good example of and a metaphor of the bucket, because your bucket of experiences is going to be very different to mine. How many layers are in yours might be very different to mine. I might only have 2 layers. You might have more, or it could be. So it's about looking at the person as an individual. And if you're doing your work through self-help or self-help books, if you're not working with someone, you have to take it back to yourself and look at what is in my experience, what's in my bucket. I love that.
Now, is traumatic experiences, do they shape our limiting beliefs and our identity in a stronger way than just negative experiences, like everyday negative
Yeah.
experiences?
Traumatic experiences can have a detrimental, negative, long-term impact, and that I speak from experience. I have had post-traumatic stress disorder twice in my life. Once in my teen years, where I was kind of just assaulted, pushed around walking down the street, and I didn't know at the time that I was having post-traumatic stress. It was in all my training I was able to look back and see that, but it completely changed how I looked at the world. So every time I went out in my teen years, I was on high alert. I felt that someone was going to attack me, even in crowded places. It was like a sensory overload. So one experience transformed so much over those years. And then in my mid-20s, there was another experience where one of my friends was assaulted. And within that experience, I was filled with fear about going through a legal process, being a witness, who was out there, was I going to get attacked? So again, my world, which was just so, I say, bright and full of hope and all of this, caused me to withdraw, to go within myself, to want to hide away and change my behavior in lots of ways. So the effects of trauma and traumatic experiences can be very detrimental and limiting to someone, more so than a negative experience.
Yeah, and it affects our identity, I find, on such a deep level. I remember I experienced PTSD my second year when I lived in London. I had my phone just snatched from my hand while I was walking down the street. And in that specific space, physical space where it happened, I was having PTSD just going out of the house and just passing through that spot, or in general. And then eventually through exposure, which is basically exposing yourself to what you're afraid of, just for people listening and don't know what exposure therapy is. I managed to overcome the flashback and the triggering that happened behind that. But my identity was affected on a deeper level, in the sense that I'm increasingly more anxious when I go out, even though I don't have the flashback. So I think it's very interesting for people to identify how they may go through a traumatic experience, overcome that experience, and not have any flashbacks of PTSD, but still have that affect their identity on a deeper level and affect the way they deal with circumstances in their life in general.
Yeah, absolutely. One example I've got actually recent from a client that I'm working with is, it was kind of some motivational coaching. That's what they were looking for, some structure and strategy around their work. And through the questions around Iemt of where these feelings were coming from and where it was going back to, it was very unconscious for this individual to suddenly be in their teen years and withdrawing in those years because of social situations and not putting their effort into work, which they had no conscious connection to how they're operating in their 40s. They thought, this is a problem I need help with in strategy, but simply through the questioning, it was going back to then. Now, this person hasn't experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. They're not traumatized around work, but there's a negative connection that goes back further, which unconsciously was feeding the feelings through at such a later point in their life, which was preventing them from doing the work. So exactly like you're saying, some people can go around their life and get on with things, but the experience may find its way through in a situation, in an experience that then starts to work from an unconscious level.
And what I found through my work as well, and I'm sure it may be true for you as well, is that, as you just mentioned, when people get triggered by going in the past, they tend to avoid going there, and they abreact. They react to it. They just don't want to go near. I don't want to go back there. I just want practical processes to allow me to move forward from this state, this point of view, without looking back. So how do we deal with our own avoidance and our own triggering with regards to that? How do we find the courage to break through the resistance and do the work?
I think it depends on what your outcome is and what you want. The post-traumatic experience I had in the place it had happened to a friend of mine, I ended up accidentally in the area. So, and I nearly physically threw up when I had the realization. And in a completely separate conversation with a friend, they never want to revisit the area, but their life is thriving, right? They've moved on, they've done the work. So sometimes we don't need to expose ourselves to heal. Yeah, sometimes we don't need to go there. Sometimes we need better resources in the present moment, which leads us towards the outcome that we want. So if the outcome is to be more confident outside, to not be affected by small noises or sounds, there's lots of different ways as a practitioner I can work with people to get those outcomes in terms of their mindset, tools and resources, rather than going to full exposure, because it's very different for each person.
So don't go asking for trouble, just be in the present moment. And if it comes find you, then do the work to heal it, essentially.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, now let's talk about Iemt, because it's a new process for many people.
It really is.
It is. Many people are familiar with EFT, with emotional freedom technique, which works in a different way, but it's a different approach to work on limiting beliefs at the same time. But can you explain to us a little bit about what Iemt, Integral Eye Movement Therapy, is?
So integral eye movement therapy is a process that allows you to work on the limbic system at the back of the brain. So you're working around the thalamus, the hippocampus, and the limbic system, where we store emotional memory. And simply from a range of movements that the practitioner can take your eyes through, the connections made at the back, which can desensitize, which is very different for each person, the outcome. But we generally look for 4 different changes, which I don't normally tell my clients because I wait for them to experience them, because then I know the process is working. But you'll get an immediate change. For myself, when I had it done on myself, which you might want to consider when you're working on your own things, is I had to write down some of the things I was working on, because I get to a level where I get a full deletion. So I can't even remember like 2 minutes ago what I moved my eyes on. So it's a very powerful process. It's a very modern approach. It does work more so than EMDR because it's going into different eye ranges of movement, and also there's so much work on identity, around personal identity, identity of language, and identity of other people that we can work on, and physical imprints. So it's a really fascinating tool. It's something that I've worked content-free with people. So I've had people that have experienced sexual abuse and don't want to open up and talk about situations, but they can identify that there's 6 memories that are flashing back to, and we can do the process on memory 1 and then memory 2 and get the outcome. So it can be quite clean for a person, which some people like. A lot of men like to work that way as well. They're not talking about the past. They're not going back there. They're just saying, I've got it, I've established it, and then we do the process. So it's very, very empowering.
That's what I like about IMT. It's a really kind process. You don't just full on exposure into the traumatic memory. You can if you want and you're up for it, but you can experience it mentally and just like dip your toes into it, and then you'll be able to still get deep results. So you mentioned EMDR, which is another process that evidence-based process, clinical process used for years by many psychologists to help people deal with trauma. And oftentimes people ask me, what is the difference between EMDR and IEMT? How would you explain that?
So from my experience of people that have come to me that have had EMDR on certain things, where IEMT goes further is the identity.
Yes.
So we recognize identity as practitioners where people are talking. So, and it'll be things around I, me, self, and you. So people will say, I am in a really good position, which is the I they're referring to. I'm having a great day, but at work, something started to bother me and it's really affecting me. So they're talking about the me. And, now I'm starting to beat myself up. So we work around I, me, self, and you. And from what I've found, where people have had EMDR, they're focused on the memory, the negative memory, the trauma, or the uncomfortable experience. The identity was still left. And I feel that's one of the big areas that IEMT covers. And a lot of those identities tend to be physically imprinted within the body. So you're getting to a specific area which releases that area. And where I've seen that massively transform people is where they're holding their anxiety physically, and actually it was an identity imprint around a negative or even a traumatic experience.
That's what I found as well. I tend to work more with people with those identity imprints, because when someone starts and says, I am not good enough, I am not confident, what if I fail? And then when you take that I and you start digging deeper into that I, you find that the I is connected to so many past experiences that created all those traumas. So how would a normal IEMT session work? So if someone comes to you, they have anxiety or a limiting belief, what would be the process, just so people have an idea as to how this works, since it's such a new process for people?
Yeah, so we would start taking general information, and then they would probably we'd formulate an outcome first. They're always outcome based. They want to feel less anxious. They want to feel like how they used to feel. And they discuss how the anxiety or difficult feelings or blockages, stuck challenges are affecting their life. And I generally then, not with everyone, but with a lot of people with anxiety, I explain the anxiety model. And I'll say, so the anxious person tends to overthink a lot or panic or worry in the present moment about the future. And they'll nod at me. And I'll say, and that thinking and panic and worry can potentially lead to feelings of frustration or anger. It could be one of them. And they can say yes. Or someone can do something or say something, or something can happen. And then you feel frustrated and you feel angry, and they'll say yes. And then from there, you might feel a different emotion like shame or guilt or regret. And it could be all of them or one of them. And then you're back in the panic and worry. And they're sitting there going, that's what I do. And so it takes it back to anxiety is triggered by so many different feelings. So it's not the overthinking, it's not the panic, it's the feelings of frustration, or it's the feelings of guilt or regret that's causing the person to feel anxious. So if that's prevalent with the person, I'll then work on the emotions around the frustration or anger or the guilt, the shame, the regret, and I'll work around those areas. But sometimes, or a lot of the time, we'll start on that emotion, but then I'll say, tell me about the frustration. And that's where I get the identity. Because yes, they know the frustration's intense, but then they'll say, well, I get frustrated with or she really frustrates me. So I've got an identity of she and the me. And it's the same. I often feel guilty after I've been angry, and it affects me because the guilt so you get so it so much comes from language. I'm literally non-stop writing.
Yeah.
That's how you get it, right? So that's how it formulates and works. If it's PTSD and they're aware of it, you're still wanting to work with the identity. So to a degree, they'll still have to talk about how it affected them. I felt like this, or it was happening to me. But more so, I would work firstly with any visual flashbacks. It's all very individual and subjective to the person, but that's pretty much how I would work. And it's a very fast approach. It's like they say on the INT website, you're looking at change in the blink of an eye, right?
Yes, indeed.
So you're moving your eyes, you're guided through. You can do this remotely online. I've worked with people all over the world doing it. It used to be before COVID so much in person, but it works really well online. And then you're measuring the result, you're noticing the change, and eventually you're leading that person towards the outcome that they want.
Indeed. I love how individualized it is versus EMDR, which is a specific script that you have to follow for specific things, whereas IEMT can be adjusted to so many different things. Absolutely. And something that I've started doing, because, I'm into the esoteric side of spirituality, I've started using it on past life memories. I'm like, let's see if it works. And it did work. I'm curious, have you also used it for any past life memories for people who said, okay, there's a past life memory coming up? And have you had any results from that?
So I've only done that once.
Okay.
That was a couple of months ago, and it was that person was very spiritual, very spiritually minded. I'd say I'm a very spiritually minded person as well. But beyond that person, it's not something that's come up, and it's not something I've considered. However, I think, you know, if you're connected to that way and you're open to that way, and you have those experiences or even feelings and energetic connections, I think it's
100%
possible. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Perfect. Cameron, thank you so much for coming on to the Lit Up Lightworker podcast and sharing this transformational new process that it's helped me so much. I've learned so much from it. And I'm so excited for people to experience the magic of Iemt as well. Can you please let people know how they can work with you and where they can find you? And you also have a discount code for us, isn't it?
Yeah, so you can reach me on Instagram at Coach Cameron Beddy, or directly at my website, cameronbeddy.com. And if you are interested in finding out more about Iemt, how it would help you, it's always good to know a bit more specifically around what area of your life you want to work on if you reach out to me. And if you just mention that you're a light worker or you've listened to this episode, I can happily offer you a discount for some sessions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, and wishing you a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks very much, George.